in these modules, we're finally going to get to the actual harms of same-sex behavior. We are going to break down this section into parts. So we're going to talk about harms to the self, harms to the family, harms to society, and then harms to civilization itself. So talking about these harms are important for all the reasons that I mentioned. First, let's look at harms to the self. And here we can also break it down into two sections: physical harm and then also spiritual harm. Both are very crucial. First of all, physically, what are the harms of homosexuality? And there are articles written on this and even books. One book, Health Hazards of Homosexuality by Brian Kamenker. And what he notes is that the anus, okay, we're going to get very explicit here, okay, and we need to know the reality of what this behavior is. We can't talk, how can we talk about homosexuality without talking about the actual behavior? And this is something that, as we saw with the agenda, they want to avoid talking about behavior because it's actually quite ugly. It's an ugly reality. But that is what same-sex behavior is between two men. The penetration of the anus, rectal penetration, and this is something that causes severe damage. This kind of anal sex over time results in the damage of that part of the body, and it results in incontinence, where a person can no longer hold in their feces because the muscles in that part of the body have been destroyed. The organ has been destroyed. There's cancer associated with this type of behavior. So this is an important aspect of homosexuality that we can't whitewash. We can't sanitize it. That's what it is. And it's exacerbated by the promiscuity of homosexual men. Men engage in same-sex behaviors. So in the West, the average man has 6 to 8 partners. The average heterosexual man in the West has 6 to 8 partners throughout his entire life. Okay, so that's, by Muslim standards, that might be pretty promiscuous, but that's just the average in the West, non-Muslim. But amongst homosexuals, it's a completely different story. 83% of homosexual men surveyed estimated they had sex with 50 or more partners in their lifetime. 83%, 50. So this is more than 5 times the amount of partners as the heterosexual men. 43% of the homosexuals surveyed estimated they had sex with 500 or more partners. So nearly half of those who identify as homosexual, as gay, have had 500 or more partners in their lifetime. 28%, more than 1/4, have had 1,000 or more partners. 1,000 or more partners. And the survey showed that 79% of the respondents said that more than half of their sexual partners were strangers. 70% that said that over half of their partners were with people that they've only had sex with once, right? So this is not committed relationships. This is not something that resembles anything that heterosexual men experience. This is anonymous gay sex. This is sex that is beyond the bounds of what is even considered promiscuous, to have more than 1,000 partners. If you can even imagine that, that's the reality of men who consider themselves gay within American society. On this question of gay marriage, the concept of gay marriage really doesn't make sense when you look at the statistics. Because marriage, when we think of marriage across religions, not just in Islam, but across religions, there is a sense of commitment between two people. They're married and they are sexually faithful to each other. And when they survey Western non-Muslim men about their faithfulness, 76% reported that they were faithful sexually to their wives. But they surveyed homosexual men who were married, and the number is less than 5%. Less than 5% are faithful to their partner. So even though they're married, they're still engaged in extremely promiscuous behavior with essentially strangers. That's the reality of homosexual behavior. And so again, when you look at the damage that's caused to the body, the damage that's done psychologically, this is something that is extremely shocking about that community. And then you have STDs and HIV. This is something also that gay men are more likely to have STDs. They're more likely to have HIV and AIDS. And even the AIDS epidemic in the 70s and 80s was primarily due to the promiscuous gay sex lifestyle found within certain American cities. And this is what caused the AIDS epidemic. Spiritually, this is also very important. What are the spiritual harms of homosexuality? Well, we already mentioned israf, and we already mentioned how Allah and Lut ﷺ calls these people musrifin, those who are engaged in israf. It's never enough. You're continuously pushing boundaries. You want more and more and more. So this is something that can actually change a person's sexuality because you are desensitized. And if you are engaged in this kind of fahisha and you're feeding your shahawat with hundreds of sexual partners through anonymous sex over and over and over again, then that can lead to your tastes becoming more and more extreme. You develop fetishes, you develop extreme sexual tastes that you want to fulfill. You want to constantly fulfill these desires. And so we find that there are extremely major paraphilias and fetishes found within this so-called gay community. And we also see it with people who develop same-sex desires. Pornography, the usage of pornography can actually lead to this, where a person has consumed so much pornography, they want more and more, they want more variety, and that leads them to start consuming gay pornography. And they start needing to have that kind of imagery in order to get the same kind of sexual satisfaction. It's the same with any kind of drug, right? With drugs, at a certain point, you can no longer get high off of the same drug. You have to escalate and go to a more powerful drug to get the same high because you've developed a tolerance. This is the same with many shahawat, where you develop a tolerance and it's no longer enough. You need something more and more and more. And we find this with pornography, and we find this with same-sex behavior and the so-called gay community. And there are some extremely shocking quotes about this from homosexuals. And this is how it's described by one of the most prominent gay liberation activists who ended up dying of AIDS, but his name is Geta Dugas. Geta Dugas. His lifestyle was he would fly from city to city to city to have as much unprotected anal sex as possible. And specifically, he wanted unprotected sex. And this was a philosophical point for him because he thought that this was the most liberating. You don't want to constrain yourself by wearing a condom. You don't want to limit your freedom through that. Even if you have HIV, you should be open to being able to sleep with as many people as you want in completely anonymous sex with strangers. And so this is how he lived his life, and he ended up giving the disease to thousands and thousands of people. And it's this kind of mentality that led to the HIV epidemic within the United States. And when you read something like this, this is a kind of culture of death. It's a culture of death. And I'll explain to you like some of the most shocking kind of fetishes, but the idea is that even sex with someone who has HIV can become a fetish. Even sex with someone who has a life-threatening disease, and at that point it was a terminal illness. And so just like you have thrill seekers who are looking for that next thrill by doing bungee jumping or skydiving or whatever it might be, this is also another kind of thrill, having sex with someone who has HIV. And this is something that's found within the so-called gay community. And I'll read you some examples of that when we get to the next modules, inshallah. And here is a quote from one homosexual man who is describing this culture. And he says, if one reads publications or websites that are specifically aimed at a gay male audience, every fifth article or story is about making the message crystal clear that casual, unprotected anal sex of any amount is not to be criticized or stigmatized or counter-signaled in any way, that people with HIV are better than people who don't have it, that not using condoms makes a person more honest and more authentic and more open to experiences and more open-minded and liberated and free, etc. And do not think it is unfair or an exaggeration to say that gay men, from the moment they start to come out, are mentally and culturally groomed to accept as an awesome and superior approach to sex this mentality, which is designed to enable those with the cruelest and most evil sexual impulses and desires. It's not unlike the pedophile's approach, the desensitization and boundary pushing and normalizing of what should not be normalized, the deliberate fostering of rot inside of another human being. So this is what a homosexual man is describing about gay culture in the modern period. And it's quite shocking that he even mentions boundary pushing. So this is israf. This is exactly what Allah is describing in the Quran. And you have a non-Muslim using those exact words to describe his behavior and his experience with the gay community. And he mentions this culture of death that desires, if you just engage in shahawat, this is something destructive. This is something that will destroy you as a human being. And it doesn't matter if it's same-sex desires or anything else. Any type of desire that you push beyond the limit will destroy you. And so this is the kind of culture that is found within the gay community. And so it's a culture of death. It is leading people to such utter destruction. So, just as a side note here, how can any Muslim support this? Even if you said that, well, okay, I'm not engaging in it, I don't think it's halal, I don't think in Islam same-sex behavior is halal, but I still mind my own business, I'm not worried. No, you should be worried. You should be concerned, because if this is something that's happening to people, do you not care about people destroying themselves? Do you not care about this existing around you, your neighbor, your classmate, your coworker, and so forth? No, this is something that's very significant. And just in the same way that you care about drug addiction, if your neighbor or your classmate or your teacher is addicted to drugs and is destroying himself through heroin or opiates or whatever, that's going to affect you. That's a person who's in your circle of influence, in your life. And so that's important for you and for your living. So of course this is an important matter, and this is the first section on harms to the self, both physical and spiritual.